Following the ABRSM's announcement about the new online performance-focused exams, which would have 4 pieces without the supporting tests of aural, sight reading and scales, I was interested to hear the views of some of the members of the MusicOnline UK community in our weekly Skype hangout, whether they thought these proposals were a good or a bad thing. That's coming up next.
MusicOnline UK.
So basically, what happened recently is that the ABRSM announced that they're going to start online exams starting in August in the UK and then rolling out to the rest of the world, sort of coming up for the rest of later in the year. Okay. And those online exams, in a nutshell, would be more performance biased, having 4 pieces in them and not having any of the supporting tests. And you just send up a recording of a complete like little recital of 4 pieces. So I was just wondering what your reaction to that was, how you felt about the new format. Rishabh.
Okay, I personally would say that I think it's not a good thing for me, like because I don't want like it could be a cheatable thing, you know, anyone could cheat this thing. So instead of, you know, and the main thing is that the people will only emphasizing on the the pieces. They will not going to practice the scales and the other technical things which we have to practice. So I think it's not a, I don't like it personally, I would say.
You don't like it? Okay, so yeah. You think the old style, well, the current style, because it'll still be carrying on, the current style of ABRSM exams is a better format because it develops the musician more as a whole? Is that what you're
right?
Yeah. Although there are a lot of people, and I can see, I totally agree with you on what you're saying there. There are going to be a lot of people who will find it a very popular idea because a lot of people just want to get exams. And I don't think that is really why we study music, to get exams. But there are people that do that. Mm. Yeah. And it might be a slightly more accessible route for some just to get a certificate. Rather than develop as a musician, you know what I mean?
Yeah, right. Sir.
Rachel, you usually have something to say.
I totally agree with Rishad. I'm very, very disappointed in this new performance exam. I don't think it bears any relation to the kind of input and technical work we do to achieve the grades we're doing. So I certainly won't be sitting that new exam. If the ABRSM do introduce the old or normal system in November or going forward, then I can take it up then. But I certainly would be very unhappy sitting a performance exam when I've done many years of work of sight reading. I do almost an hour, half an hour sight reading every single day. My sight reading, I hope, is very good. I do a lot of aural singing, which I found incredibly difficult. I've done a massive amount of work over the years, and just to, you know, wipe that out totally, you know, it's just not for me.
Okay. Oh, we have a new person just joined the chat. Richard, is it? So we were just chatting actually about this new format for the online exams and the fact that it's performance focused rather than with all the old aural tests and the sight reading and the scales and everything else. And just everyone was giving their opinions. I think Rachel and Rishabh have both expressed they're not that keen on the idea. What are your thoughts? I mean, have you studied it at all?
I tend to agree with what the other people are saying. I think that one of the things that is very powerful about the ABRSM program is that it's music exams, not simply performance. And as a, you know, an older student who didn't study any music for 44 years, I found that having to work on the aural aspects is extremely useful to me and helpful, and it's also very difficult, yes. But worth making the effort.
Now, that is a very mature approach. You see, what I'm worried about is that, as you say, it is a difficult area, and a lot of people will probably say, hooray, no more aural, because, you know, that's the part that everyone fears and dreads, or maybe the sight reading. And then they'll think, easy option, I'll just do performance, learn another piece, you know, and then we're going to suffer as musicians, I think, maybe. Yeah, is that the feeling?
Agreed.
Yes, I do. The other aspect to that is that about, advancing oneself as a performer or a musician or whatever. I'm working on grade 8, and I'm sort of approaching the end of my second year of working on grade 8, and I'm finding it extremely difficult, just because I'm older and everything's very, very slow. And having the other aspects of the exam to work on as well helps to kind of spread things out a bit. So when I'm getting a bit too up in my head about what's going on at the keyboard, there are other things that I can turn my mind to and continue to advance my progress. I do find it helpful. I find that sometimes if I do that, I take a break from the keyboard, when I'm ready to go back, I actually find that I've improved anyway, because my brain's been processing stuff.
Okay, because it's the risk, isn't it? If we get rid of these supporting tests, we're going to suffer as musicians. So do you feel that these supporting tests have actually helped their instrumental skills? Unquestionably, yeah. I mean, you say you spent a couple of years working on your grade 8, and I understand it's quite a high standard, isn't it?
Yes.
It's some of that just learning pieces takes a long time, and learning notes, because maybe building up the sight reading skills to go along, that helps learn a piece maybe slow.
Without a doubt, building up the sight reading skills helps, because it's a memory thing. So, when I'm trying to perform a piece, a lot of the mental bandwidth, such as I have, is occupied with the notes, even if I might have been working on a piece for a year. And so the more facile I am at grabbing information off the page and transferring it to the end of my hands, the better.
Yeah. Excellent thoughts, yeah. Because I do find a lot of my students will memorize something in a very short space of time.
Yes.
And then they stop reading, which is actually bad for their sight reading. And then if they start to develop a bad habit, like you may play something slightly differently to what's on the page, then they don't even notice they're doing it, because they're not looking at the page anymore.
Right. Right.
Before, you're saying it's a bad idea because you spent such a long time on these supporting tests, yeah? But if you hadn't spent a long time and you're just coming into it fresh, do you think it might be a better idea, or you still think it's a bad idea because of other reasons?
Because if you want the easy way out, go and sit the Trinity. I mean, it's, the ABRSM has been established for a long time, and for me it's a very difficult, the grades are difficult, and there's a reason for that, because it shows the excellence of the students. And to achieve that, you have to put the input, like, for instance, Rashid, with our Prelude in B, with the Chopin piece we're doing on grade 6. So ultimately, we're doing the arpeggios nearly all the time. So with those semiquavers, and if you're not doing any technical scale, that kind of, all gathers together with, with that piece. And I just think, just to play pieces, you don't have the backing and all that input to go in to play that piece correctly.
Okay. So what about, I'm just playing devil's advocate here, if as a good teacher or a good student, you did the background studies, but your exam was still performance-based? Yeah, because I'm thinking, right, when you go into a music conservatory or academy or something like that, you go up to the higher levels, like the diploma exams and the rest of it, and it is based on a recital then. Yeah, but at that point you've already learned all the scales. At that point you're already pretty good at sight reading. Yeah, I think they do give you a little sight reading test as well, maybe in some of the diplomas for like orchestral players, and to be able to play well in different contexts, you have to have a good ear. So all that stuff is sort of almost understood. And if you are teaching properly, so, a good teacher will teach scales, whether they're examined or not. Do those supporting tests need to be examined exactly? Or should they just be taught and not examined? There's a little thought.
Definitely, because you need, it's not just performance, they're testing your ability on the wide range of music, as Richard was saying earlier. It's not just about performance, it's about your ability on music.
Okay. Rishabh.
Yeah, sir, I'm also agree with her, because say if it's all about playing a piece, I think it's not a good thing. I have seen many many players that who play by the ear and play by some YouTube tutorials, and they don't know anything about the music theory. And if this thing will going to happen, they can learn the piece anyhow, and they don't need to think about the oral test, and they don't need to read about the music and these things. So this is I think this is same as ARSM, that the higher diploma, because they don't ask for the oral test and for the sight reading and any technical terms. So it is good for if you have a base, the music theory, and some scales, arpeggio, whatever things which are which we need to be a better musician, then I think it is really helpful for us. But for starting, if I'm doing for grade 1 and I'm a kid, I can learn anything. The learning piece is not a big deal, as we know that anyone can learn it. But the main thing is that the root thing, that is your scales, your arpeggios and other things. So that is I want to say about this thing.
Now, there's a very interesting point here, because some people, okay, if they were just relying on supporting tests, okay, to get them through, and they're quite good at those, could possibly pass the exam, but their performance isn't so good. And some people's pieces are worse. Now, there's a very famous person in this particular genre of YouTube. Well, I don't know if anyone's heard of, well, I won't give names because that wouldn't be fair, but he usually has a predominance of all the piano videos in the ABRSM syllabus. You probably know what I'm talking about without saying any names. Recently, he posted, or not recently, a year or so, he posted on Facebook that he passed his grade 8 violin. But he basically passed it on his supporting tests, scales, arpeggios, sight reading, but basically failed all the pieces. Now, there's an interesting concept going on here, isn't there? Do you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah, but that's got to be a very unusual case, because the weighting of the marks is such that to pass just on all the ancillary stuff without doing reasonably well on the instrument is quite difficult.
Yeah,
look at the marking structure. That's not an easy thing to do. You've got to do halfway decently with the pieces, otherwise you're just not going to pass.
I think it was just very marginally below pass on the pieces, maybe one or two, maybe one of them passed, but then the oral training was a little bit higher, and the sight reading and things like that. So, yeah, I can see what you're saying. No, Rachel, you mentioned Trinity, and Trinity being easier because it doesn't test the whole musician. Do we think that's a fair comment?
Yeah, because first of all, you don't even need to do grade 5 theory to sit grade 6 Trinity. And one of my family members is sitting grade 6, and I had a look at the syllabus, and the amount of scales and technical ability that you have to learn was, I would say, about 30% of what I'm learning. Like, I have to learn all the scales, and there was virtually, there was not the same volume whatsoever.
Okay, but you do know that next year's syllabus, they're going to reduce the number of scales massively anyway. Yeah?
Well, as I said before, that's a shame. I don't know why they're doing all this.
Yeah, we discussed that in last week's hangout, didn't we, about the new changes for the normal exams next year. Yeah, and they're just basically going to focus on technique rather than the sheer volume of scales. So in that sense, it's going to mirror Trinity quite similarly from next year onwards. When you're talking about supporting tests, now, if you get onto grade 6 Trinity or grade 7, let's go find a Trinity book. Let's find one that's a higher grade. Right, there's a grade 7 Trinity, right? So for the supporting tests, you have to do sight reading and oral or improvisation. So you can get out of the oral if you do improvising. Yeah, but you still have to do sight reading and oral. And in the slightly lower grades, if you go into grade 5, you have to do 2 out of 4 different supporting tests, which could be sight reading, oral, improvising, or musical knowledge. Now, what does it mean by musical knowledge in the Trinity exam, in the practical exam? It's sort of answering like theory questions based on the pieces that you're playing. And there's another devil's advocate question. Is that a better way of learning theory related to the actual pieces you're playing rather than abstract theory questions in a booklet, cold, as it were? What do you think?
I think that the ability to answer theoretical questions about what you're actually performing is crucial.
Okay.
And even though it's not in the exam, I do spend time looking at that aspect. And you know, how many people can play a few pieces but can't name the key signatures they're playing in?
Yes, good point. Yeah.
No.
And not even understand there's a perfect
You just don't even look at the key signature anymore, or think about it, or think about where it's moving to, and whether it comes home or whether it disappears off somewhere else.
Yeah, and I think sometimes understanding a little bit of the theory can also help the way you interpret an exam. I'm thinking,
Yes.
this comes to my head now, the grade 5. Do you remember this one, Rachel? We went through this a while ago. And sometimes understanding that there's a cadence,
Yeah,
helps you understand how to phrase something. So, you remember this one? Yeah? And you've got these cadences at the ends of the phrases. But you've got that cadence there. And then the next phrase, da, da, da. All right? Knowing that that's a cadence at the end of that first phrase helps you understand where to phrase things, where to breathe and lift and join things together.
Yeah, I would say, sir, I think both are both the things are like essential for the like personal growth and for the music ability, because as I know that I have studied my music theory till grade 5, and some things which I didn't knew until I played it. So like some things like the trails and the grace notes, I have studied this thing, that is okay, that is apochychera, that's a cachechera, but I didn't know how to use this thing. When I got to play this thing, then I realized that okay, this thing is, now I'm getting it. If I'm going for the starting from the beginning from the piece, that I won't be able to understand what is this thing. So I think for me I think it's both the things are really essential.
Why is oral training good for a musician? Why do you think? I mean, Richard earlier said it was an essential part. Why, Richard? Why do you think it's an essential part of learning?
because we all think that we can listen, right? And you certainly can. You can listen to music and you get all sorts of emotional input from it. But actually understanding what's going on is quite a different thing, and that is tremendously important when you're trying to learn a piece and to play it. If you don't really understand what's going on, you're never going to get terribly far past playing notes.
I think sometimes also being able to sort of interpret it musically rather than just being technical.
Yes.
Yeah, is a very important part of that.
Understanding the technical, understanding how that music is being formed helps.
Mm-hmm. And also, I mean, in the Trinity, they have this whole thing about possibly doing improvisation, or another skill that a lot of musicians, not necessarily classical musicians, but popular musicians have, is playing by ear, and that is a thing in itself, which is a valid skill to have, isn't it? But I don't think you could play by ear at all if you had no oral skills. You could have pitch notes in your head and understand what you're hearing, And I think all of us at some point or another have tried to play something by ear, haven't we?
Yes.
Yeah. And not just play the melodies by ear, but understanding chords and playing those by ear. What harmony am I hearing here? What's the bass note in this chord? And, and that all helps. So who might be taking these exams in the future if they were on offer? Now, I remember last week, Rishabh, you said you're a bit lazy on learning all your scales. Yeah.
I am.
And maybe you struggle with the singing and the oral.
I do.
That said, would you be tempted to take one of these performance exams?
Still not, sir.
Still not. You still want to
No.
go back to the older format?
Yeah,
Stick
I
with it.
want to. I want to improve my, exam laggings. I just improve those things instead of, not attempting that. And I think it's not a good thing for me as a musician.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Well,
Now, Rachel was clapping there. I think we've got Rachel's answer already.
just to give you a slightly different perspective, so I'm in America, right? And so most music teachers are not familiar with ABRSM.
Mm-hmm.
And my piano teacher, I introduced her to ABRSM, and when she realized how it worked and that it really is a music exam, she was just totally taken. But she said, we've got nothing like this in America.
Yeah.
And it's true. The training works. The obvious example, look at the Kenner Mason family. They all went through ABRSM, and look at them. Now, could you do it without ABRSM? Of course you can, but there's a quality to the structure that builds you up, as a musician all the way along. And if you pay attention to the whole thing, you're going to progress to probably faster and to a further point than perhaps if you neglected a lot of the issues. So I think that the requirement to pass theory, both as a technical on paper exam, as well as applying it to the oral test, is valuable.
And it's very interesting what you're saying there. I do get the impression that there are going to be two camps of people. There are people that it seems like we've got a majority of in this particular little group here today who want to develop as musicians.
Yes.
But, and I don't want to sort of offend any particular cultures, but it tends to be a little bit sometimes the Eastern cultures are more just exam factories.
Yeah, perhaps so.
And to those sort of people that just want to get exams rather than develop as musicians, this could be quite an attractive proposition. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's definitely necessarily a good thing.
I think it's unfair because all the many decades or centuries of these exams where people have done all that rigorous effort and work and ability, and now someone else is going to pop up after playing 4 pieces, big deal, and say, there you go, I passed my grade 6, I'm a grade 6. How is that fair?
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I mean, I think the criteria will be quite high, and also they're going to give what they call performance marks. Now, another thing, they've got the 4 pieces, 30 marks each, and then another 30 marks. They haven't actually published how they're going to actually do this yet, but a little bit like the ARSM exam, which will be just marks given for the performance as a whole. And that will be your sort of skills as a musician, as a performer, not just as a technician. And also the way you can create a balanced program and the way you put your program together, having pieces that contrast in style and different techniques. You can go to some concerts and the program hasn't been put together very well, has it? It's just a whole pile of similar pieces, which gets a little bit boring after a while and doesn't really show the different variety of things that you can do. Yeah, so you'll be marked on that as well, I'm sure.
I think it's very important to not be concerned with comparison. I mean, for example, if you're taking exams and somebody took the same exam, 30 years ago, how often we hear them say, oh, well, of course, the standard's lower now. Well, so what, right? So what? What matters is how you're developing as a musician. I think that's really what we need to keep one's eye on is, how's it all turning out for as an individual, not compared to anyone else, but for yourself. How's it actually turning out? And what generates the best result?
Yeah, and that is a really good comment actually, because there are so many people, and it's so easy, even in the Western cultures, to turn into exam factories.
Yes.
Yeah. And we just go for exams. And then we could be stuck on 3 pieces, like the usual student would have 3 pieces for 6 months or longer. And they wouldn't do no sight reading because they're just doing 3 pieces all the time, even though they should be. Yeah. And it's not developing them as a musician at all. All right. I think exams are a good measure of just seeing, you know, where we've achieved, basically, just to sort of use for our own comparison. Yeah, I don't agree with comparisons in the sense of absolute comparisons with other people, but to compare where you were last year with where you are now, that's a good thing. So you could say, right, last year I was grade 2, now I'm grade 4.
Right.
And that's good. And you can see an improvement in yourself. And it gives yourself little goalposts and ways to sort of measure your progress. Yeah, but that progress, as Richard was saying, I totally agree, should be as a musician, not just as a technician or an exam factory.